E Benedetto is supposed to introduce me, I will introduce myself. I am Giovanni Rottura. When we are abroad, I can tell people that I do live in the UK, but I am Italian inside. Because I get emotional, I move my hands, and I love it. Okay. So, very quickly, because we are already late, EdYouFest is a community, okay? EdYouFest is an opportunity to meet, to stay all together, and to take advantage of the network, of course. Sometimes some good idea is coming up, some opportunity for Erasmus, for others, but not because we are doing the event, it's because of the community, okay? In this brochure, you can find all the information in this magazine. You can find all this information about EdYouFest Etna Pedara. We don't go to main hotel or fancy place. We go in place like Pedara, that for us are more beautiful than the others, and we enjoy some place like Etna. So this is the beauty. We are here. I thank you to come here today, because sometimes it's difficult. Today I lost my way to come, even with the GPS. But we are here. This is very, very good for us, and I get emotional now. Is our community is really coming through from this point of view. Please, I do invite you to visit the EdYouFest website. There are so many opportunities, all for free. We do have a community where, of course, we support each other with 20 euros per year subscription. But for us, it's just to create a scholarship. We support the teachers to join us. We did have until the last one, not this one because technically it wasn't possible from Ukraine, for instance. We did have several teachers that we supported to come to Derry in February, or Tokyo, or when we were in Bucharest or Athens. Next time we will be in Serbia, Belgrade, and we are already started to support some teachers with some flight or accommodation. So if you are like to join our community with the 12 euros, it would be nice. And but we do have, you will see on the EdYouFest website, an ecosystem that is quite strong. Webinars, blogs, magazine, conferences, and more. And I do invite you to read the last part. This is a competition, no? It's a documentary contest. And the winner, they will be invited to come to Malta in September to be awarded for to be a winner, of course. So please have a look into this competition, and if you are happy, apply for. Okay, we have already several applicants from different countries. To have from Italy, it will be also good for me as an Italian person. I enjoy your day today and tomorrow for the people coming to visit Etna tour, and now.
Thank you, Giovanni. So, in the morning, from now to 12:30, please be punctual for the lunch that will be at 12:30. We will have two talks by two special guests, two international speakers, George Kokolas and Daniel Sherry. So we will start with George. The title of his talk is Positive Education and Human Wisdom in an Age of AI. We are happy to welcome him. He is an academic director at Express Publishing and an expert in English language teaching. He has more than 30 years of experience as a teacher. George is trained in positive psychology and neuro-language coaching. He uses brain-friendly methods to help students learn better. He has given over 1,000 workshops, so that's why I asked his age, and in 90 countries. In this session, George will talk about the importance of human values in a world overwhelmed by artificial intelligence. He will explain how positive education can help students develop skills like character, wisdom, and resilience, things that technology cannot replace.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for this introduction. Thank you. Actually, we need to give a big thank you also to Giovanni and EdYouFest as well, because it's because of EdYouFest that we are here. And I've been following this project for over 4 years now, and I can tell you that what I just told you is true. EdYouFest is growing, it's a community, and the power of the community is very important, specifically in the era of AI. Practically, he asked me to deliver this talk again. This is a plenary that I have delivered over 13 times in various international conferences, but you are the first Italian audience that is going to attend it. And that was the only reason why I wanted to give it to you today. Plus, another reason was that it was totally connected to AI. And because in practice, I'm going to speak about something completely different. However, there is a bridge there. There is some kind of connection. And this connection was given to me by a video that I'm going to play. I will start this presentation with a video. It was not on my bio, but I'm very active on social media. I keep it strictly professional, and I always try, to make it as positive as possible and motivational for the people. So when I posted this video, which is a viral one by its nature, I also became semi-viral. Okay, I got a lot of likes, I got a lot of views, but it was the first and the only video that actually spoke to my heart about the dilemma that it was even mentioned during the introduction, AI versus humans. Okay, let's watch it. I'm sure you're going to get it, and then we're going to say a few things about it. It's very short.
We're going to continue to hear about advanced artificial intelligence systems, quantum computing, space, all of these deeply technical advancements. But some of the most important skills have nothing to do with the technology. And even for parents, it's not being able to navigate an iPad passively at 5 that will dictate whether your child will do well in the future. If you said, my child doesn't really like working on the iPad, but she's reading 4 books a day, she loves her sports teams, she wants to spend too much time at the park, I would say that child is going to thrive in the future. There's technicals we need to be centering, because we are preparing kids for a future we cannot see, which means we have to prepare them for anything, regardless of the way technology evolves.
Sinet at Bovel is not an educator, she's not an academic, but she's a very high-end consultant right now. And I think she pinpointed the main focus that we need to turn our attention to. And that's what I want you to do with this talk. I want you to shift focus. There were so many truths in this video. First of all, about the human skills that obviously positive education can foster, and that's what I want to talk to you about the values, about the character development. The second has to do with all this obsession with technology. I might be right now how can I say, the most technological freak in the room. My life is completely organized by technology. Because of my position, I receive all these offers and marketing about different applications and programs every day. I'm very much into technology, and I can tell you right now that you are in control. In the age of AI, humans are in control. AI is not in control. And it's at the end of the day, it's a matter of choice, whether you want to go this or the other way. I know there is too much to be learned, and obviously this is an everyday thing, but you don't have to panic about it, okay? Just take it slowly, take it easy, find what is actually practical for your classes here in Pedara, because at the end of the day, nobody will come. Everybody will try to sell to me, but nobody will come to my classroom on Monday and see what's actually happening there. So don't get carried away by, somebody's using this or somebody's using that. Try, experiment. It's a long process, and a process that we need to get hold of it. But never ever actually diminish what this lady said. Other kind of skills, how many books your students are reading per day. What about the social skills? My friend and colleague Daniel here has a wonderful study right now, which he just told me that it's about to come out regarding the human skills. And I can tell you from my perspective, specifically to all these young lads right there, human skills is what's going to pay you out there, because that's how you make the difference. not tech skills, not any other kind of certificates or degrees. Of course, you have to acquire them, but are the human skills that actually make the difference. And let me switch PowerPoint after this introduction and move. I need to go upstage, they told me, because of the live feed. I would prefer to be with you, but they said it's better that way. Okay. I'm going to start this presentation with a quotation that means a lot to me. Okay. I'm sure this is the only country, every time I show this quotation to other countries, people don't know. They can recognize the language, but they don't know a lot about the context. So, can you possibly understand or know where this phrase comes from? Or what does it mean? Captatio benevolentiae. What does it mean to you? Come on, it's ancient Italian, it's Latin. So, what could it possibly mean? Captatio benevolentiae. Engage, okay. Capture the goodwill. Does anybody know who actually said this phrase for the first time? No? Okay. I have a short story about this phrase. That was a phrase that it was continuously being repeated by one of my chemistry teachers when I was at the 3rd class of lower high school. Provincial Greece, there was chaos in the classroom, and this man would actually say, guys, we need to have captatio benevolentiae. We need to have captatio benevolentiae. And back then, of course, nobody bothers to look it up. Nobody ever knew what that meant, but it's actually stuck as a memory on my mind. And that very same phrase, 37 years after, was repeated by one of my university professors in one of the positive psychology courses. And he said that this is actually the first thing that you need to do if you want to feel a little bit more positive about your life, about your profession, about your mindset. And to give you a little bit of trivia, that was actually a phrase which was first said by Cicero, defining the principles of public speaking. And he said that if you want to have a good talk, you need to capture the audience spirit. You need to be able to have a good start. And if you want to train your minds to a more positive mindset, I can tell you that this is the first thing we need to have, a good start. And that's what I'm planning to do with you. Giovanni asked me to shorten the presentation. I will try to adjust to the time so to leave some time for Daniel. But I would like to start this presentation with a story. But we are going to make a deal. I'm going to give you 90% of the story now, and the ending of the story at the end of this presentation. Are we good with that? Have we got a deal? All right. Let's travel back to India, around the 50s, where Mahatma Gandhi was very, very famous. And he would get these huge lines of people waiting to talk to the master and seek some kind of advice. Among them, there was a lady with an overweight child, like me. She had to travel, actually, she got the train, she had to travel from her remote village for 36 hours. She had to wait in the line for another 5 hours, and there she is in front of the master. Master, my son is eating too much sugar. Can you please advise him? Gandhi, very calm, looks at the son, looks at the mother, and says, go back to your village and come back in 3 weeks' time. The lady had no other choice. After all, he was the master. Catches the train again, another 36 hours, waits in the village for another 3 weeks, catches the train again, another 36 hours, waits in the line for another 6 hours at the time, and there she is in front of the master after 3 weeks. So, do you remember me? Of course I remember you, said Gandhi. You are the lady with the overweight boy. So, what advice have you got for my son? And Gandhi, very calm again, looks at the mother, looks at the son, and says to the son, "Stop eating sugar." The mother was fuming. She was really upset, but after all, he was the master. She actually gathers up all the how can I say, civilized manners that she has, and she says to the master, "Master, with all due respect, I traveled twice for 36 hours. I waited in this queue twice for 6 hours, so you can actually advise him not to eat sugar? I could have told him that." And Gandhi, very calm, very serene, looks at the son, looks at the mother, and says to the mother, "Remember, we made a deal." Okay, so the end of the story at the end of the presentation. Okay, talking about positivity, I must tell you that this talk has another title, which is more mundane and more marketing-wise, how to be a more positive teacher. And when I'm talking about positivity, which is another word that has been stretched into different directions, I always get this question. So do I have to study positive psychology? Do I have to become a psychologist? And I can tell you that positive education, that right now it has been coined as a science, does not require that. You don't have to be a psychologist in order to be a positive teacher. You don't have to be a psychologist in order to be a positive educator. You get aware, you read the texts, you get trained on these techniques, but you don't have to be a licensed psychologist. And I think I ought to give you a little bit of history, very quick one. The whole positive psychology movement, it used to be called the movement, started from this man, Martin Seligman, back in 1999. I think he had the bravery to come out and say, "Look guys, psychology is half-baked." Half-baked means that until now, the majority of the people who go to visit a psychologist is about a problem. It's about something negative, not something positive. And he actually has this wonderful theory of -10, saying that actually a psychologist can get you from a -10 to 0. A psychologist, even today, is not trained to generate happiness. He's trained to, very professionally, of course, get you from the negative and bring you in balance, but the next steps have not been officially catered from psychology itself. And then there's another lady, Barbara Fredrickson. I call her the mother of positive psychology, which I also had the chance to meet her in person. And she came up, she spent her life actually for something that you may already know. The Broaden and Build theory is something that we all feel, but now science can actually define. Broaden means that when we are more positive, when we see the things in a more positive way, we broaden our horizons. So we have a more open mind. We are more receptive to new ideas, to other people's opinions, and think how important this is for generally in life every day. And the build theory has to do with something that, again, you feel, but sometimes we ignore or we forget that the more positive we feel, the more positive emotions will be generated around us. Positive feelings has this capacity of being multiplied, of going spiral, going upwards. That's why it's called Broaden and Build theory. But Mr. Seligman was a little bit itchy about his theory, and you know why? Because he knew very well that this cannot be within the limits of the academy. It had to go out to the people. And what is the best channel for this to happen? It's you, it's us, the schools. Geelong Grammar School in Australia, even long before Seligman came out officially with his theory, they were having positive psychology practices at their school. So they invited him and they told him, "Come here, stay with your family, and let's see if your theory actually works in practice." Everything that you need to start from, everything that you need to know, all the research, all the experiments, all the conclusions, everything is in that book, which is called Positive Education by Jackie Norris. It's fully available. We're talking about over 450 pages of research of why positive education can be implemented at schools and how this can work actually wonders. And if I am to provide a definition, these are some of the definitions that I resonate with, that you can find so many more on the internet. But what I want you to keep in mind is that when you try to feel more positive, or when you are a more positive teacher, this does not mean that you break jokes all the time in the classroom. This does not mean that you are not having a lesson. This does not mean that academic performance is not linked to that. On the contrary, it blends academic learning with character and well-being. That's another two words that are being used a lot, and wider umbrellas. Grit, optimism, resilience, growth mindset, engagement is based on the science of well-being and happiness, positive psychology. And here you can see in a more schematic way, we combine actually learning, academics, pedagogy, accomplishment, excellence, and at the same time, resilience, meaning, connection, and the PERMA model is something we're going to see in a minute as well. But if you see these two things separately, I think they are in a vacuum. And positive psychology, positive education brings them together in one field. And I think this is a great achievement and accomplishment. Also, since we have the actual author here, we had the chance to host them both with Sarah Mercer in Athens for the Official Greece conference as well. Daniel, with Sophia Mavridis, another great collaborator, they have edited this book, 20 English for 21st Century Skills, where there, Sarah Mercer, who is right now #1 well-being English language teacher specialist, she's one of us and the person who has actually implemented well-being in her class. She has an amazing article that praises you, teachers of English, and says that our subject is the most suitable context for well-being to thrive because of the variety of the sources, because of the different resources that we have in order to practice our lesson. The context is more favorable for positive education practices. So I always listen to the experts, and that's another proof why maybe you should try it. So far, so good, and you may say that I have convinced you, and you want to know more about positive education. The next most frequent question is, okay, where do I start from? And I will look you in the eye and say, start with yourselves. Because no matter what you want to do, AI-related, technology-related, professional development related, you need to start with yourselves. So if you want to feel a little bit more positive as a person and as a teacher, for me, there are 3 preconditions that you need to do. Number 1, self-reflection. Another expert of that is Daniel. He has an amazing talk where all this is being analyzed. You know, it's here just a mentioning and a very minimum thing. But at this stage, I want to make a lot of people start thinking about their own selves and more to make it a practice in their everyday life, to spend like 10, 15 minutes per day to think, what have I done today? Where am I going? Why am I doing this? Is it any valid? You know, it all starts with you, even through the self-reflection. It's practically, you know, receiving every kind of information from different sources, reflect on them, and then go a little bit deeper. That's the general scheme. There is a lot of literature behind it, and of course, it becomes more specific. But because I come across so many friends and people who don't even know about this, I always try to motivate people to start, make this half step towards thinking a little bit more about themselves and actually think, you know, is this for me or not? You can keep a journal, you can keep notes, even on an application, and you can actually reflect after creating. That's a very good start, actually. The second thing in psychology is called self-intervention, which means, yes, that you think and you decide that you want to do this, but it's like exactly the sign that you see when you get on the plane. In the bio, it was mentioned that, you know, I have covered 1,000 presentations. It's true, I have lost count, but that requires a lot of traveling. So every time I enter the plane and I see this phrase, I'm okay, I can understand what it means, but semantically, I have an objection regarding how imperative this should be as a sign. Because here, it's not clearly stated that if the adult won't put the oxygen mask, something bad will happen to the place, to the person in need next to him or her. So how imperative this is not stated by this phrase. And this is my next advice, that after you decide that you want to do that, try on to yourself. Before I want to help other people, I need to try this on my own. I come across many teachers who do that. They are always anxious to help other people, but you can tell that they cannot help themselves first. So you need to try and experiment, just like with AI. And of course, the third, take action. Talking about positivity, reading books, reading papers, reading this and that won't get you anywhere unless you practice it. Unless, students look at you and say, he's a positive teacher, he's a positive teacher. So it's all about the embodiment of that, as many other things in life. This is not spectator sport. It's a sport that you need to get the ball and play in the field. So we need to expose ourselves a little bit. And of course, one of my favorite academics, Justin Robinson, I'm going to mention him once more. He said, positive education is not taught, it's caught. There is a lot of material online, there are a lot of activities, you can study endlessly about that. It's a new science, as I told you, but it's about being able to convey the message in practice, being positive in ourselves. Why? Simon Sinek says, find your why. 3 reasons for me. Because I have another position, I'm one of the founding members of the International Positive Education Network, IPEN Greece, which is again funded and supported by Mr. Seligman. I do have access to very serious data. So whatever you see on the screen is 100% accurate, and it's back from 2022, 2021. I'm going randomly to read some of these. 1 in 5 children and young people aged 3 to 17 have a mental, emotional, developmental, or behavioral disorder in the US. This is about Australia. 1 in 13, 12, 17 years old seriously consider suicide. This comes from the American College Health Association. It's not very recent, but I assure you, and that's the reason that I didn't change it, that if you log in that particular website, these percentages and these data haven't changed much. On the contrary, they went higher. This is about the academic impact of negative feelings to students in higher end universities in the United States. Stanford is here, Berkeley is here, every post high-end university in the US, it's actually there. Look at this. Sleep difficulties, 31.9. Stress, 12.5. Anxiety, 25.9. Depression, 16.9. So even, in higher academic institutions that people would actually kill to get in, negative feelings are always present. Let alone all the trauma that was left to our students from COVID. Thousands of research of papers are up there confirming the same thing. When I Googled it, I got really, really tired because there were so many. I just picked a random that this is, I think, from Saudi Arabia. All over the world, the people, the teachers, the students could not actually recover from the trauma of COVID 100%. So practically number 1 reason of why this is happening, should be happening, is negative feelings, which are pervasive and all over the place right now. Now, I have a question for you for my second reason. Which are the 2 days in the whole world that are days off for everyone and you are not allowed to do anything at all? What do you think? Spoiler. We have a spoiler here. Okay. There are 2 days in the year that we cannot do anything. Yesterday and tomorrow. Usually I get, the Easter day or the Christmas day or the 1st of May. No. But if you attend any course on positive psychology, this is the first thing that you need to be trained on. Focus on today. You cannot change the past, unfortunately, and you cannot predict the future. So the more you focus on today, the more positive you become. And it's, the past is gone, the future is not here. It's all what we talk about mindfulness, okay? Some of the activities that you can practice with your students is ask them to focus on their studies now so as to reap the rewards later on. Stop stressing about what grade you're going to receive, because this is totally regulated, this result, from the effort that you are going to put on right now, okay? The more you focus on your studies, the better you're going to do. The idea of savoring, the idea of taking a step back and actually appreciating what you have in your hands now. What do we have here? We have a wonderful conference. We all come from different countries. We speak the same language and we can learn things, okay? It's about appreciating today, which starts making you already feel more positive. And of course, having a great time now can robust students with resilience for difficulties that may come in the future. All these, the things that you actually stop and think for a moment and you appreciate what you have, can actually shift to another level of mindfulness. And this is something, again, that many people talk about, but very few people show to the teachers how this is done. So focus on today and mindfulness is the second reason. How can I say this? I'm gonna share another story from my personal life now that we became friends, which will help me explain the next point. I'm very grateful of my parents. My parents are still alive. They have supported me throughout all my journey. But I still remember their words during my childhood saying, George, you need to study hard. And after you study hard, you need to enter the university. And after you enter the university, you need to find a good job. And after you find a good job, you need to make a lot of money. And after that, you need to find a wife. And after the wife, you need to have children. And after you complete all these, you will be able to be happy. Okay. That was exactly the dogma, which I did. And I'm very proud of my family and of my wife and of my children. But maybe, I don't know if this is the recipe. My kids are 21 years old. I have two wonderful daughters, they're students, and they study right now, and I'm very proud of them. But in Greece, I don't know if you have the same thing in Italy, there is a very stressful process of the university entrance exams. Practically, you need to sit for 4 courses, for 4 lessons that will define the rest of your life. And I could see my daughters, because I had, both of them in the house. They were going out, they were partying, they were keeping their hobbies, they were having boyfriends, they were enjoying their lives, actually. And at a certain point, as a parent, I entered the room and I said, are we okay? Have we studied? Are we in a good position regarding the exams? And I received from both of them like a talk to the hand answer. Dad, stay there where you are. We are in absolute control of this. Because if I am deprived of the things that I like to do, this will actually make me feel depressed. This will make me feel not happy. And if I'm not happy, it's then when I'm going to fail this exam. And I told you these examples because that was exactly the scheme that you can see, the scientific scheme of positive education and psychology that you can see on the screen. My parents were practically telling me a prescription, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, happy. I'm not sure it works like that. My daughters were telling me, first I'm going to be happy, and then I'm going to be successful, which is exactly what positive education preaches and supports. Achieving success and values won't make you necessarily happy, but you need to have happiness and values so to achieve success. And what I'm trying to tell you is because many people talk about values as being a prescription, it's not a prescription. It's like a northern star. It's like a compass where it shows you the direction, just like AI. If you follow it or not, it's up to you. It's your choice, and it's about what actually makes you feel better. It's not about what we would like to become. It's not what we think we should be. These are two great distractors here that we have. It's about us, covering first our needs. This is another scheme that I use with English teachers, because we all know the Bloom's taxonomy, but I would say that first, we need to put our first needs, Maslow hierarchy of needs. In other words, this is wonderful, it's about critical thinking, it teaches you how to think, but how can I reach this if I have kids who don't have air, water, food, if I have kids that are not safe, if there is no love and belonging, if there is no esteem or self-actualization? This came out in 1956, this came out in 2001 or 2005, I think, right? So Maslow first and then maybe Bloom. So it's about helping the students finding their own values, and stories can do that as well. Use as much material as possible with stories. They can be great motivation. It's not me, it's Carol Dweck. If you haven't read her book about the growth mindset, I think every parent or teacher should actually read that. He has a specific chapter about stories integrated into any curriculum, that how can actually motivate the young generation. She has a kind of, not fixation, she has really seen the story of Michael Jordan working with their students, because Michael Jordan was a failure, but through this process, many students were motivated to pursue more, focus more on today, and give an extra effort. So any kind of stories or talking about values in the classroom can be helpful. So values are actually more than welcome. And if you are not still convinced that happier students are better students, you can take this photo. This is just the tiniest fraction of the hundreds of papers that exist on the internet right now, and there are proper research that do support this idea. The happier I am, the better student I will be. Something else. Martin Seligman, another book that I highly recommend, The Hope Circuit. We have one past or multiple futures. We have so many choices, the way we think matters. So it's not if you have 100 AI applications, it's which one you actually choose or not choose. And of course, Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor, and of course, a very active philosopher and psychologist as well. Between stimulus and response, there is space, and that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and freedom. And this is a person whose eyes has seen a lot. But one of my favorite research, because I know I can read your minds actually now, some of you may be thinking, and I am 100% with you, George, what are you talking about? I don't want to be positive, I want to be negative. Is there a problem with that? And I'm with you. Okay, I do understand this, but all I'm asking you is just to stop and think. And this time is not George, it's Sonia Lubomitsky, another psychologist, but a lot with positivity. She actually dealt with this specific question. How much of your negativity or positivity depends on your genes? 50% is genetic. So if you have a disposition towards negativity or positivity, might be because of your genes. And to tell you the truth, our brain, because of historical reasons as well, has this proclivity for negativity. We tend to think negative more than positive. 10% is what is happening in your life, because some of you may be going through a happy period, some others may be experiencing very difficult or even hard times. But look at this. 40% of your positivity or negativity, it's intentional activity. Is what actually you choose. And this is a very, very high percentage to be ignored. Okay, so science says that we need to keep on trying. I'm not excluding negativity from our lives. On the contrary, I'm going to talk about that. It's not about being happy all the time or avoiding the negative emotions. It's not securing a child away from failure or adversity. On the contrary, it's training them how to face it. Positive is not one size fits all and not another program to introduce. And when you have Justin Robinson, who has 1 PhD, 2 MAs, I don't know how many BAs, he is like one top academic. He was one of the first who came up with a positive education product, school program. When you listen to him saying this phrase, we refer to ourselves as passionate, not as experts, you realize that it's not about the qualifications, It's not about the technical skills, but it's more about the passion that you have about what you do, feeling positive or not. And of course, there is a lot of research. If you are interested in implementing this like a school approach, it has to be proactive. It's evidence-based approach, which means that we are still looking for data, and it's a strength-based approach. I highly recommend that you have a look at the character strengths scheme. You can find it online. It's almost open source by Peterson and Seligman in 2014. 6 different virtues and 24 different character strengths that actually lead to these virtues, which means that you need to walk the path. You need to go through all this in order to find wisdom and knowledge. You have to go through all this in order to find humanity. And in that specific website, you can find the test that it won't take you more than 22 minutes to finish, and you will discover your own 3 most dominant character strengths. And it's a wonderful activity if you do this with the students. And when you start talking positively about what you have, because we all have these strengths, but not that much developed, then it's when positive emotions become spiraling. And here, if you want to take this photo, this is an activity that I recommend, that I have made if you want to do this like an annual project. The whole year round, the students discover, talk, and they practice character strengths. Can somebody tell me how much time I have? 2 minutes, right? Okay. More? All right, okay. Can you recognize the man in the picture? Guys, you don't know who this man is? No? Michael Phelps, the swimmer. Can anybody recognize where this photo was taken from? Which ones? I'm not buying that. Okay, I could roast you a little bit more, but I won't do it. Okay, this is a photo taken from the Olympic Games of Beijing 2008. In these Olympic Games, Michael Phelps won 6 golden medals and broke the world record twice. This specific photo is from the award ceremony of the 200 meters butterfly style. And why I'm telling you this? I'm telling you this because in that particular race, something amazing happened. Once Michael dived into the pool, his goggles filled up with water. He couldn't see one single thing. Yet, he broke the world record and won the golden medal. But obviously, people who know about swimming noticed immediately, let alone his coaches. So they knew that he couldn't actually one single thing. So the first question of the press conference was, Michael, how on earth did you make it? And Michael very calm said, it was very simple. I had a plan B. Which means that Michael Phelps had actually procured beforehand and knew what to do when the goggles will fill up with water. And maybe I can read your next question. What about the bad things that are happening to us? What about adversity? What about tragedy? What about whatever comes in life? I told you before, I wish I knew. If I could actually predict the future like you, I wouldn't be here. I would become a millionaire, all right, like you. It's impossible to predict what is going to happen, but it's very possible to procure about it. Obviously, that was not my story. That was a story that I read in that amazing book by Gabriel Otsigen, Rethinking Positive Thinking, where we can see the scientific definition of mental contrasting. Mental contrasting is what many people know what it is, but they don't practice it. Is that you have a dream. I want to be rich, I want to be famous, I want to be Michael Phelps, I want to be this, I want to be that, fair enough. You can visualize the outcome, but at the same time, you need to visualize the obstacle. What could possibly go wrong? And not only that, have a plan, prepare a plan in order to get over the obstacle. And then, yes, you can actually make your wish, like exactly what Michael did. Bad things will happen, but how much we cater for this is the key to face adversity, and positive psychology and mindset does not exclude this. It prepares us, on the contrary, in order to face it, and this is a very important thing. Another question for you, moving towards the end. You were sat during an armed robbery. You were injured, but you survived. You narrate the incident to a friend. Do you feel lucky or unlucky? First of all, this is not a test. Second, there is no certificate. Third, there is no right or wrong. So I know that the majority of people feel lucky, but is anybody who would feel unlucky after the narration? No? Okay. I'm talking about the power of perspective and how we see things, because the fact is that you experienced a robbery, but how you narrate this to a friend tells me a lot about your positive or negative perspective, because the result is exactly the same, right? But how I feel about it tells me a lot about how I see it. This is one of the character strengths, the perspective. This is a very interesting and funny research as well. They chose 12 overweight American hotel maids that they were trying to lose weight and they couldn't make it. But when they actually told them that, look, have you realized that what you do every day, it actually exceeds the Surgeon General's guidelines for fitness, all of them started losing weight, because climbing stairs, lifting mattresses, sweeping the floor, they are very hard chores to be done. And once they change their perspective, maybe out of placebo, it doesn't matter, they start losing weight. And of course, there is no objective truth, because the man is the measure of all things, said another guy from my country, Protagoras. Keanu Reeves, at the end of Matrix 1, knows very well what Matrix is all about, but he chooses to stay. And those of you who have read 1984, Policeman O'Brien is torturing, you may remember, Mr. Smith, played by John Hart and Richard Burton, to admit that 1 + 1 = 3. And John Hart, Mr. Smith, knows that if he admits that, it's like betraying his own reality and truth and moving into a world of unreality. And practically, again, about perspective, do you dare to know, as Immanuel Kant used to say, that risking the possibility that what you want and what is true are two different things? And how brave are we to cross into this different perspective? Our beliefs are forming our expectations, and this is the biggest distraction for us to feel positive. Sometimes that's why I'm telling you, you need to start with yourselves. This is maybe what is holding you back, but practicing the idea of perspective is really, really important. This is one of the character strengths that I highly recommend. These are some perspective activities. And these are the two models that, if you want to start from somewhere, the PERMA model I talked to you before is more general, but there are many applications in Central Europe right now dealing around, for schools, positive emotions, engagement, positive relationships, meaning accomplishment. And Mr. Seligman has actually announced that he's thinking of publishing a third one, a V for vitality. Remember, Justin Robinson, we refer ourselves as passionate. So how much passion you have about what you do, how much positivity, energy, and zest is also important for feeling positive. And we talked about the character strengths. Let me put it simply. Anything that you may practice within this sphere, you are entering the sphere of positive education, and I'm positive that something good will come out of this. And I think, here I need to stop. Remember, it's not taught, it's caught. Thank you very much. The end of the story. Okay, sorry. All right. So Gandhi looks at the son, looks at the mother, and says, "Lady, 3 weeks ago, I also used to eat sugar." which means that even the master of the masters, before he decided to give an advice, he would have to experience himself how it is to be without sugar for 3 weeks. And when he actually practiced this himself, then he was able, as a master, as a mentor, as a coach, as a teacher, to offer this advice. So practice what you preach is my motto for you teachers right now. Do not be afraid to experiment. There is a lot of positivity in that, and something good will come out. Thank you very much again.
Thank you, George. Your speech was so interesting and passionate. Thank you very much. Now it's time to our second speaker, Dr. Daniel Sherry. And then the title is Leading and Teaching on Empty, Understanding Burnout in ELT. So we are pleased to welcome Dr. Daniel Sherry, Associate Professor at the University of Malta, and an important figure in ELT. He also works with the Ministry for Education in Malta. Dr. Sherry has written over 250 publications and focuses on teacher development and education. He studies the challenges teachers face in their work. In this session, he will talk about burnout in teaching and in leadership. He will explain why teachers and leaders feel exhausted and how this problem affects their work. He will also share ideas to create a healthier and more sustainable work environment. Dr. Daniel Sherry.
Grazie. Buongiorno a tutti, come vi sentite? Bene? Allora, questo intervento non sarà in italiano, sarà in inglese, ma vorrei ringraziare Giovanni per l'invito e gli insegnanti che hanno organizzato questa conferenza. The topic of today's talk is something that I've experienced personally, and I'm sure many of you here have been affected by it, or at least came very close to it. It's something that doesn't only affect teachers, but it also affects school leaders. And in what I'm going to be saying today, I'm going to be talking about the experience of burnout and the stress associated with it, but from the perspective of both teachers and school leaders. It is a talk that is also based on my own research with school leaders and educators who have experienced burnout or else came very close to it. I'm going to start by showing you a photo or an image, an AI-generated image, that is derived from this particular research that I'm talking about, and I'd like you to tell me whether you ever felt this way. This is a metaphor that one of the people that I interviewed about burnout used to describe how it felt. Have you ever felt as if you were being chased by a train? As if you couldn't cope with all the pressure and all the stress of the job? Or is there anyone here who hasn't felt this at all? Well, many educators around the world feel this way. And I'm sure that if you're passionate about the job, if you've been doing it for several years, there were moments in your career when you felt this way. And you felt that your passion for the job, your dedication to your students, wasn't always something that was recognized by people outside of the school. In fact, earlier this year, a study was published about how the people out there in society perceive us when we talk about the stress of the job. Can you imagine how they describe us? Any thoughts? A bunch of entitled moaners. That's how they see us, or how some people see us, how some parents see us, how some other professionals see us. Okay? So there is also a lack of sympathy out there for the challenges that we experience as educators and the burnout that ultimately our job sometimes leads us to feel. But what is burnout? How can we define it? And one good place to go is the definition by the World Health Organization, which sees it as being made up of different components. So the first component here is that burnout is something that we experience on an emotional level. It's when we seem to be out of energy. We no longer have energy to do what we love to do as educators. We also sometimes feel as if the job that we love so much is no longer giving us that satisfaction. So there is this distance from the job. We start feeling cynical about our job as educators. And we also start feeling as if we're no longer effective as educators. We feel that we're no longer giving our best, and the people who depend on us for their success, our learners, our students. But if you are a school leader, the rest of the community that you lead, then you feel that you're not giving them what you feel you should be giving them. So it is an experience, it's a syndrome made up of different components. When I talked to educators about what burnout means for them, they described it in these ways. So burnout is something that we experience emotionally, yes, we feel exhausted, but we also feel physically exhausted. And I'll be showing you quotes from actual teachers and educators who describe how burnout affects them on a physical level, sometimes making them feel ill. You feel overwhelmed by the demands of the job. So the job that you are passionate about, that you enjoy doing, suddenly feels overwhelming. You start dreading the very idea of going back to work, of waking up in the morning and going into the classroom. Or after your holidays, you dread the idea of going back to school. There are people, educators, like that, unfortunately. And I'm sure there are people in this room who have sometimes felt this way. And the other point is that there is a lack of balance between the demands of the job and our own personal life. This is a quote by one of the people that I interviewed. And this individual is talking about how this lack of balance, this inability to allow the job to overwhelm them, affects them not only on a professional level, but as you can imagine, also on a personal level. So when people experience burnout, when educators are impacted by burnout, it is not something that they can leave at school, at work. It intrudes into your personal life. It affects the way you relate with your children, with your spouse, with your partner, with your relatives. And that is the dangerous thing, that you cannot leave it behind you once you leave the classroom. Another educator talked about how burnout is something that we allow to happen in certain cases. When we put so much emphasis on doing the job, perhaps because of pressures imposed on us by our superiors, by society, by the school that we work for, that the job ultimately becomes the central focus of our lives. And this makes us feel that if we're not meeting the expectations of others, then we're going to ultimately be seen as failures. So these are actual quotes from educators. And I'm sure that some of the quotes that I'm going to be sharing with you resonate with some of your own experiences. If you've ever felt that the stress and the pressure of the job was overwhelming and you couldn't handle it, and it's what was ultimately impacting you on a personal level. When we look at the literature on burnout, and there is a lot of literature on burnout, especially focusing on teachers, okay, we see that burnout is something that is made up of a variety of factors that work together. So there is this complex interplay of factors. Burnout isn't just created by how we're doing the job, or, for example, by classroom management issues, but it is also created by, for example, the expectations of our school leaders. Or, if you're the school leader, by the way your employees relate to your expectations and the way they perform their duties. So burnout is created by all of these factors coming together. And one important thing we need to remember is that burnout, despite it being a syndrome that we experience on a personal level, on an individual level, it is something as a phenomenon that exists on an organizational level. So sometimes we hear from self-help gurus telling us, if you want to deal with stress, you need to do this. It's as if you, all of you, you're solely and individually responsible for dealing with the stress that you experience as educators. In reality, the problem can only be resolved if we look at it on an organizational level, on a systemic level. And that's what I'll be coming to at the very end. It is not something that we can tackle only on an individual or on a personal level. So the job is very demanding. We all know that, yes, as much as we love teaching, as much as we love leading a community of teachers and students, it's a very demanding job. Not everyone appreciates that out there, and people who have never stepped into a classroom, sometimes they don't show any sympathy for what we do. They don't show any appreciation for how demanding the job is. But yes, if we find ourselves working in an organization where we're not being adequately supported to deal with the demands of the job, this makes it even harder for us. And if there are people here involved in academic management, school leaders, then you need to also think about this, because you have a responsibility to ensure that the people forming part of the school community are well supported, rather than being left to their own devices and having to deal with the demands of the job on their own. In my interviews with educators, they mentioned various experiences that were characterized by burnout. Some educators, for example, talked about having to do the job with very limited resources, where the expectations were excessive in certain cases. School leaders talking about running a massive school with very little support, with very little assistance, but also dealing with extraordinary situations or extraordinary circumstances. There was one educator who also talked about the emotional fallout of witnessing a student die at school. And as you can recall, COVID-19 was also a very stressful experience for us as educators. Whether we retained our job because there was support for us to continue working remotely, or whether you lost your job during COVID. And there were many educators around the world who lost their job, especially in the private sector. So in this quote, we see an educator talking about how the demands of the job made them feel as if the entire situation was crazy and chaotic, overwhelming, something that they couldn't really cope with. Another educator talked about the COVID years and how in his job, sorry, this was a male educator, in his job as the leader of the school, the pressure on him wasn't just running the school, but now it was also ensuring that the teachers he was responsible for weren't going to lose their job, that they were still able to pay the mortgage, that they were still able to feed their families. So this ultimately led him to come very, very close to burnout. It was a really stressful period in his career. So we've talked briefly about the causes, but how about the effects? And I'm sure on an individual level, you're able to tell me what some of these effects are. If you've ever experienced intense moments of stress that has led you to feel that the job is taking too much from you. Well, these effects impact us on a physical level. Do you ever recall a time where you were getting ill very regularly? It could be, for example, getting a cold very often, because our own immunity is affected by the stress that we experience. So in my research, I came across educators who described burnout as affecting them on a physical level, because they were sometimes unable to even get out of bed in the morning. The emotional dimension of it, how we're impacted by the emotions we feel when we're drained of energy, physical energy, impacting us also on an emotional level. And the impact on our personal life. And I'm sure there are people in this room who have sometimes felt so stressed that when they went back home, they were unable to behave as they normally do with their families, because the job was ultimately taking so much from them that they couldn't speak to their children, to their husband, their wife in the way they usually do. And I had interviewees who talked about this as well, snapping at their children, becoming less patient with their partner. And if we think that when we are under massive amounts of stress, we're able to keep performing as we normally do, well, we're sometimes wrong about that. We can only keep up appearances for so long. Our own performance as educators is impacted as well. And we know what happens when that ensues. Our students will also be affected by our own experiences of stress and burnout. And unfortunately, there are educators who are in this kind of situation and who start thinking about leaving the job. This is the truly tragic part. When we're no longer supporting educators on an emotional and psychological level, but also on a systemic level, what's happening is that we lose teachers. Globally, and I'm sure this is also something that you experience here in Italy, we have a massive problem with teacher attrition. Teachers who leave the job. And most often they leave the job in the first 5 years. When that happens, it is the entire social fabric that is affected. Society is impacted by losing people who are dedicated to teaching. So yes, we start thinking about quitting. And one reason is that we start realizing that the job we're doing is no longer giving us the satisfaction that it once did or that we expected to do. Another reason is that we start thinking about how it's important to be a bit selfish. We need to protect ourselves if we can give our best to others, to the community that we form part of. So this particular interviewee talked about experiencing burnout as a form of shutdown. It's as if his mind shut down and he was unable to operate in the usual manner. Another interviewee talked about how she felt physically sick because of her burnout. And it is her life outside of work that was mainly affected by this experience. This particular interviewee talks about keeping up appearances, trying to do his job in the same way that he's always done it, trying not to show that he's under a massive amount of pressure, so that the school community is not affected. But deep down, this is harming him in such a manner that he has to ultimately go home and find an outlet for those feelings, for those emotions that are ultimately negatively impacting him. And this last quote talks about how the people who are ultimately our family, our relatives, our friends, our lovers, they sometimes are impacted by this as well. Because we stop being so patient, we stop relating to them in the usual manner. So our personal life, the personal dimension of our life is also impacted. Now, here in this particular study, we get this idea that burnout and the emotional exhaustion that comes with it is one of the main reasons for which teachers leave the profession. So earlier I was talking about the phenomenon of teacher attrition, which is a global phenomenon, teachers quitting their job, okay? And burnout is considered to be one of the main causes for this. The problem is that it is not only us as experienced individuals, as experienced educators who are affected by burnout, but even people thinking of joining the profession. In fact, there is something called anticipatory burnout. This is when novice teachers who are still in training, doing, for example, a university teacher education course, they hear so much about the challenges of being a teacher and about how teaching affects you emotionally, physically, but also in a very personal manner, that they are almost already overwhelmed by the very expectation of stepping into the classroom. And that is why the first few years of a teacher's career are crucial, because that's where we lose many educators. And the biggest effect of all, obviously, for us who really care about our students, is that our own student success is impacted by our feelings, the stress that we experience, the burnout that we experience. We cannot ultimately compartmentalize in such a way that our performance remains top-notch, remains the same as it was prior to that stress. So, now that we're aware of these effects, what could we do to mitigate them? What are some of the things that can be done in order for us to deal with massive stress, emotional and physical exhaustion, and eventually burnout itself? And these suggestions come from the people that I interviewed. These are strategies that they themselves use in order to deal with the effects. Now, not all of these strategies might appeal to everyone in the room. You might find, for example, that yoga is not something that you've ever considered. I myself, for example, wouldn't consider that, but I do have other ways in which I deal with the stress of the job. But for these educators, what they're doing is trying to deal with the issue on an individual level. As you can notice, most of these strategies are very personal. They are strategies that they are implementing on a personal level. The one that I really like, and which many of us are not very good at, is the last one. Learning to say no. I, for example, I'm hopeless at this. I'm really not good at this. I say yes to everything. But that affects me. It affects me a lot. And when I experienced burnout, it affected me for a period of 3 years. It took me 3 years to recover from burnout. So the strategies mentioned here are on a personal level, but that is not enough, as I'll be talking later. Other educators talked about establishing very clear boundaries, ensuring that in dealing with your colleagues, but also with your superiors, you make sure that what you're expected to do and the level to which you're expected to do it is very clearly set out. And those boundaries mean that you don't do work in your personal time. Many of us here, however, are guilty of the opposite. We take work home. We do work on weekends, okay? Whether it's marking, lesson planning, creating materials, whatever it is. And because we do that, those boundaries become very hazy. And we're always expected to do this in our own personal time. Being very clear about what needs to be done, becoming better at time management, at planning, not just having short-term goals, but having long-term goals and strategies for how to achieve them was one of the suggestions that the educators in my study mentioned. And quite importantly, we are part of a community. We don't operate as educators on our own. Despite the fact that what happens in our classroom is sometimes comparable to a black box and no one knows what's happening in our classroom because very few people ever enter the classroom apart from our students. At the same time, we have to see ourselves as part of a community of educators, school leaders, parents, students, and other stakeholders. And that community is there to support us. Or if we are in a position of leadership, we have to create a community where professionals support one another. This is very important in order for us not to feel alone. Because sometimes the job makes us feel as if we're entirely alone and we're dealing with the challenges of the job entirely alone. If you are in a position of responsibility, for example, you're a team leader or you're leading a school, delegation becomes very important. Avoiding micromanagement, avoiding trying to do everything yourself. Because this is one of the reasons why school leaders, for example, experience burnout. They try to do everything themselves, and that is very, very harmful. Another important thing for us, especially those of you involved in some level of responsibility within a school, is to understand the system, to understand the way the organization is structured, and to understand what might be causing teachers undue levels of stress. This is significant because, as I mentioned at the very beginning, burnout is not just a personal phenomenon. It is a systemic phenomenon. It is something that is created also by the very organizations that we form part of. Taking time off. Now, regularly might not be something that we can afford to do, okay? Especially if we have set holidays and we can only take time off during those holidays. But the people in my study spoke about the importance of protecting that time off, of ensuring that if I have a few days of holiday, that is time for myself, for my family. It's not time for my job. Because once I start allowing the job to encroach on my leisure time, that is where I lose control. That is where I allow the job to become my God. And leisure activities are very important. So yes, I mentioned yoga earlier. Having a pastime, having a hobby, practicing a sport is crucial. And for the people in my study, this was one of the best ways in which they made time for themselves and ensured that it wasn't always about the job. It wasn't always about the fellow professionals, their colleagues, or the students. Here we have a couple of quotes illustrating these very ideas. We can see in the first one, this comes from a school leader. And this school leader talks about ensuring that the very people you employ as part of your school community, as part of the teaching staff, are the right kind of people. Because if you're not surrounded by the right kind of teachers, then you're going to suffer massively as the leader of that community. So she talks about hiring teachers who have a can-do attitude. Teachers who are willing to give a lot to the job with your support, but without relying on you as a child would rely on a parent. And if school leaders are constantly hand-holding teachers, that is going to impact them massively. Here, in this quote, it's about those boundaries that I talked about earlier, ensuring that your superiors are very clear about what your duties consist of and when you're expected to perform them. And having those boundaries means that once you go home, you're not dealing with emails, you're not creating materials at the very last minute to be used tomorrow, or that kind of thing, okay? You are ultimately entitled to the time for your family and for your personal life. Here, this individual talks about the significance of discipline. We ourselves need to be more disciplined in order to protect ourselves from burnout. If we're not sufficiently disciplined when it comes to those boundaries, when it comes to ultimately what is expected of us and to what level of ability and at what time of day, then we're going to run into problems. This individual is a mother, and despite the responsibility she has, because she's leading a school, she made it very clear with her boss that every single day, irrespective of how busy things are, she will go back to her children. And she won't be expected to do stuff outside of her working hours. If there are school leaders in the room, these are some bits of advice that have been derived from the research. The first one is making sure that you choose the right kind of institution to work for. Because if you work, for example, for a workaholic, that is going to be highly problematic. If you work for someone who has a very poor work-life balance, that is going to be problematic. This is because leaders who are themselves too engrossed in their job and are not able to separate the job from their personal life will expect you to do the same. Even if they don't say it, but they will, through their expectations, expect you to perform in the same way that they do. So choosing your employer very carefully is a very important bit of advice. Ensuring that you're surrounded by supportive professionals, people who help you, who support you, who assist you to do your job well and to care for your community. If you are a very caring kind of school leader, but then the people that form part of your institution lack the same level of care, this is going to affect you tremendously. And it's going to ultimately lead you to do way more in order for your students to keep benefiting from the experiences that they're meant to be benefiting from. Trusting others. Sometimes we fail to realize that we're not working in isolation. we are ultimately part of a community, and we need to support one another and trust one another, rather than to be constantly suspicious of the people who form part of our community. And for these individuals, valuing your own learning. We talk about the significance of CPD for teachers. You yourselves, if you're here, you believe in CPD. But sometimes we fail to talk about how leaders of schools, they themselves need to value CPD. And by continuing to grow as professionals, they are better placed to deal with burnout. Listening to your teachers. If there are individuals here who have ever felt as if their immediate superior, the line manager, the school leader, didn't listen to them, I empathize with you. And this teaches us something about how, when we are in a position of responsibility, whether because we're leading a small team or else leading an entire school, listening is perhaps far more important than speaking to teachers. And seeking peer support. Just as we have support here in this room, educators supporting one another, leaders themselves require support. And that's what they sometimes lack. They feel very isolated. Many school leaders talk about the feeling of being alone, of not knowing where to get support. Here in Italy, however, you do have associations like AMP that are associations for dirigenti, school leaders, and that's good because we have many teacher associations around the world, but very few associations for school leaders. Some quotes to illustrate these points. This is about the importance of listening to teachers, listening to the school community. And if we are teachers, listening to our students as well. Building your team very carefully. Even if you're a teacher and you've been given some responsibility and you're leading a team within your school, making sure that you choose the right people to work with. Because if you don't have the right people, this is going to affect you a lot. It's going to ultimately lead to more stress for you. And ensuring that support is something that we build into the very institutional structure. There are mechanisms in place within the school that provide educators with the support that they require. And supportive leadership ultimately means a lot. For those of you who are in positions of responsibility, don't underestimate how reliant teachers are on the support that you provide them with. If teachers don't feel that you are supporting them as the leader of the community, then they're going to feel even worse in terms of the stress of the job. So supportive leadership, as the literature shows us, helps teachers to experience lower levels of emotional exhaustion, lower levels of stress and pressure, because they know that, for example, the school leader has an open door policy and you can talk to them, they are accessible. If that isn't part of your institution, then that is problematic because you're going to feel very, very much alone. And you know, you don't have the school leader to turn to when the problems start becoming bigger and bigger. And this is a quote from an article I published a couple of years ago, talking about the very idea of dealing with the phenomenon of burnout, not just on a personal level, not just expecting teachers to go to a therapist or find someone to counsel them, but ensuring that we start dealing with the issue on a systemic level. If, as societies, as organizations, as institutions, we don't do this, teachers are going to keep experiencing burnout because it will always be something that we associate with individuals rather than with the system that those individuals form part of. So it's essential, if we have the power to do this, whether we are educators, school leaders, involved in trade unionism, teacher associations, that we actually bring about this change on a systemic level. And to summarize all of the ideas of this talk, I've prepared this diagram. It's a compass that enables us to manage burnout more effectively. The word manage is important because it goes back to the World Health Organization definition for burnout. People who are incapable of managing the stress, that's when they experience burnout. So the first quadrant is about knowing what it is. What is burnout? Recognizing it in ourselves and in our colleagues, if need be. The second quadrant is about knowing what is leading to burnout. What are the drivers behind burnout? What is causing it? And as you can see, it is a phenomenon that is primarily systemic, but then it manifests itself on an individual level. The third quadrant, the bottom right, is about the effects, the costs. And the reason why I'm using the word costs here, because burnout doesn't just affect us personally, but it affects our schools and it affects society as a whole. Earlier, I talked about how we start losing teachers. When we start losing teachers because of issues like burnout, it is not only our school that is impacted, it is broader society that is impacted. And that is tragic. And the last element is about what we can do. How can we safeguard educators from this phenomenon, this severely damaging phenomenon? And here we have some suggestions, but the most important one of all is recognizing the idea that we cannot do this alone. We cannot do this on an individual level only. We won't resolve the problem of burnout by taking up yoga. We can only resolve the problem of burnout by sitting down together, analyzing the system that we form part of, and determining what needs to be changed so that we can provide people with a more supportive ecosystem. If you go to my website, you can download some articles that I've published on burnout, but there are many other articles on topics that are relevant to this conference. For example, Gen AI. I've published quite a lot about Gen AI, and many, many other topics. I try to make most of my publications open access because I believe that teachers are entitled to research, and research should be free. Thank you so much for your attention, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you so much. It was very interesting. And now I will invite here Dottoressa Michale to greet us, and on behalf of the mayor of Catania City.
Buongiorno a tutti e a tutte. Scusatemi se intervengo solo adesso, ma ho aspettato che il nostro sindaco potesse salire qui a pedare e prendere parte a questo meraviglioso momento di confronto. A Catania abbiamo la festa della polizia, per cui non è stato possibile che lui venisse. Io sono la sua delegata per la dispersione scolastica. Di fatto all'interno di questo meraviglioso istituto non esiste la dispersione scolastica. È un istituto che accoglie, lo abbiamo visto già dai bambini e le bambine che in maniera veramente egregia hanno suonato gli strumenti, si sono uniti tutti insieme, hanno suonato anche l'inno, non solo quello nazionale, ma anche l'inno alla gioia. E questo è un momento che di fatto prende tutta la gioia possibile, tutta l'energia possibile. Incontri come questi dovrebbero diventare veramente contagiosi. Sarebbe bellissimo se si facessero e si organizzassero in più scuole, perché in questo momento storico, soprattutto un po' particolare, vediamo cosa succede nel mondo, costruire dei ponti di pace come questi e costruire anche amicizia tra ragazzi e ragazze, tra insegnanti che operano con e per i ragazzi, è davvero un modo coraggiosissimo di costruire. Io ringrazio il preside Fabio Pidotta, che non a caso ha una scuola vicino al vulcano, perché è veramente un vulcano di energia. Ringrazio tutti i professori, gli insegnanti, ringrazio te, ringrazio la scuola per avermi in più occasioni accolto, e lo ha fatto sempre con infinita veramente gentilezza e direi anche accoglienza. Grazie, la città metropolitana c'è sempre, veramente con tanta amicizia. Il sindaco e anche il nostro assessore all'istruzione Andrea Guzzardi si dispiace, ma naturalmente gli impegni istituzionali sono tanti. Poi soprattutto qui vedo dirigenti che sono sempre pronti anche a partecipare ad attività del Comune di Catania, ma anche loro purtroppo non possono esserci sempre. Grazie, buon lavoro a tutti, grazie.
Grazie, dottoressa. Now some technical information about what we're going to do in a few minutes. All together, it is a tradition, EdYouFest tradition, to take a picture, all of us, all together. So, could you please get on the stage safely, and then we're going to take some on the stage and some here on the floor. After that, we move to the courtyard to have our lunch, offered by Istituto Alberghiero, made by our students. Thank you.
E allora no, lo metto sotto notte, dove non dà fastidio.
Wow.